It was supposed to be a normal winter evening at the bakery. Golden light spilling onto snow-covered sidewalks, the scent of vanilla and cinnamon wrapping around customers like a warm blanket, glass cases displaying elaborate cakes that looked almost too beautiful to eat. Then the door opened softly, hesitantly, bringing with it a gust of frigid air. A homeless woman stepped inside, gripping the hand of a small girl whose pink dress was faded and far too thin for December, whose shoes had holes worn through the soles. The mother's eyes were tired, the kind of tired life carves into a person over years of surviving. They stood before the display case filled with birthday cakes, buttercream roses, fresh strawberries glistening under the lights. The little girl pressed her face close to the glass. She whispered, "Mama, can we get one? Just a tiny one." The mother swallowed hard, her throat working visibly. She forced a smile that trembled at the edges, that never reached her hollow eyes. Then she leaned toward the cashier and spoke words so quiet, so heavy with shame, that only 3 people in the entire bakery heard them clearly. "Excuse me, do you have any expired cake? Anything you're throwing away today? It's my daughter's birthday." The cashier's face hardened with disgust. Behind them, a well-dressed couple exchanged knowing looks and moved away, as if poverty might be contagious. But someone else heard it too. Sitting motionless in the darkened corner booth, a figure who had been there for over an hour without ordering food, without moving, without even seeming to breathe. Valerius Titus. He saw the little girl in her worn pink dress trying so hard to smile through her disappointment. He saw the mother blinking rapidly, fighting back tears she couldn't afford to shed in public. And he heard those whispered words clearer than a scream, sharper than breaking glass. The cashier sighed impatiently, her voice loud enough for others to hear now. "Ma'am, we don't give handouts here. If you can't afford to buy something, you'll need to leave." The little girl's shoulders dropped. The mother's hand shook as she turned toward the door, defeated, invisible once again. Then Valerius slowly stood. His chair scraped against the floor. The entire room froze. He moved with impossible grace, each step deliberate, predatory. Customers instinctively stepped back without knowing why, their bodies recognizing a threat their minds couldn't name. His shadow fell across the mother and daughter, and the woman turned, terror flooding her exhausted face. She recognized what stood behind her, not who but what. Every survival instinct she possessed screamed at her to run, to grab her daughter, and flee into the winter night. But Valerius knelt down. He lowered himself until he was eye level with the little girl. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost gentle, but it carried the weight of centuries, of empires that had risen and fallen, of power so absolute it didn't need to be raised. "Tell me, little one," he said, "what kind of cake would make you smile on your birthday?" What happened next would bind 3 souls across the impossible divide between the living and the undead forever. Stay with me until the end, because what this ancient vampire king did next would shatter the boundaries between darkness and redemption. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. Valerius remained kneeling, his pale eyes fixed on Vera with an intensity that should have been frightening, but somehow wasn't. Behind him, Marilyn's breath came in short, panicked gasps, her body trembling so violently she could barely stand. But he didn't acknowledge her terror, not yet. His entire focus belonged to the child. Vera's eyes widened, uncertainty flickering across her small face. She glanced back at her mother, seeking permission that didn't come, then whispered, It's a castle, made of chocolate, with raspberry towers and flowers you can actually eat." Her voice grew smaller. "But that's silly. Those kinds of cakes aren't real." "They're very real." Valerius tilted his head, something ancient and sad passing behind his eyes. And today, you'll have one. He stood with that same unnatural grace and turned to the counter. The cashier, Sarah, according to her name tag, had gone pale, her hands gripping the register like it might anchor her to reality. When Valerius approached, she took an involuntary step backward. "That cake," he said quietly. "How long would it take to make?" Sarah's voice cracked. That's a custom order. At least 2 days. And it would cost." She swallowed hard, recognition dawning in her terrified eyes. Everyone in this city knew those eyes, that face. Over $400. Valerius reached into his coat and placed 10 crisp $100 bills on the counter with deliberate precision. The silence in the bakery was absolute. "Keep the change. And while your baker works, I assume someone here can create such things tonight. Prepare a meal for them." His gaze swept over Marilyn and Vera, cataloging every hollow cheek, every protruding bone. "They look hungry." Sarah nodded frantically, her hands shaking as she gathered the money. Valerius turned back to Marilyn, and when he spoke, his voice carried gentleness that somehow made him more terrifying. "When did you last eat? A real meal, not scraps." Marilyn couldn't answer. She knew what stood before her. Everyone did. And nothing in her years of surviving had prepared her for this. Marilyn found her voice somewhere between terror and maternal desperation. "What do you want from us?" The words came out harsh, trembling. Every instinct screamed at her to grab Vera and run, to flee into the winter night where at least the dangers were familiar. But her feet wouldn't move. "Why are you doing this?" Valerius turned to face her fully, and for a moment, the predator vanished. What remained was something far more unsettling, something hollow, haunted by centuries she couldn't begin to fathom. "Because 338 years ago," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of ages, "I watched my mortal sister and her daughters starve to death." His pale hands curled into fists at his sides. "I was newly turned, learning to hunt human blood in the darkness, learning what it meant to be a monster. By the time I returned to them, thinking I could protect them with my new power." He stopped, his jaw tightening. "I was too late to save them. I am always too late." Something in his voice cracked, an impossible sound, like ice fracturing deep within a glacier. For just a moment, Valerius Titus, the ancient vampire king who ruled the city's supernatural underworld with absolute authority, looked utterly, devastatingly human. "But perhaps," he whispered, "not this time." The bakery remained frozen, every customer too afraid to move, too afraid to even breathe too loudly. The only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerated cases and Vera's quiet breathing. Then Vera, who should have been terrified, who should have hidden behind her mother's legs, stepped forward. "Are you sad because you miss them?" Her voice was small but steady, filled with the kind of innocent clarity only children possess. Before Marilyn could pull her back, Vera reached out and touched Valerius's hand. His skin was ice-cold, inhuman. But Vera didn't flinch. She just looked up at him with those wide, understanding eyes and held on. Valerius went completely still. For 3 centuries, he had not wept, couldn't weep, the dead thing inside his chest having no tears to give. But something broke. Something deep and fundamental, a wound he'd convinced himself had scarred over centuries ago, suddenly tore open fresh and raw. He looked down at the small hand in his, at the child in her faded pink dress, and felt the ghost of a heartbeat that hadn't existed since 1687. Valerius straightened, and just like that, the vulnerability vanished. His composure returned like armor sliding into place, piece by piece, until once again he was the untouchable predator who commanded fear with his mere presence. He released Vera's hand gently, almost reluctantly, and turned his full attention to Marilyn. "I can ensure you and Vera don't end up like them," he said, his voice steady now, businesslike. "I own properties throughout this city. You'll have an apartment, secure, comfortable. Vera will attend the academy, where the protected children study." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Where mortal children living under supernatural guardianship learn to survive in both worlds." Marilyn's mind reeled. Protected children. Supernatural guardianship. The words felt unreal, like something from a fever dream. We can't." But Valerius had already pulled out his phone, turning slightly away. When he spoke, the language that came from his lips was ancient, musical, utterly foreign. Latin, but not the Latin of textbooks. This was the Latin of emperors, of an empire that had fallen to dust 15 centuries ago. "Prepare the East Wing. We have guests. Mortal. Vulnerable. Increase perimeter wards immediately." A pause as someone responded on the other end. "I don't care what protocols require. Do it now. And send a car to the bakery on 7th Street. We'll be waiting." Around them, the other customers began whispering frantically. An elderly woman near the window made a quick warding sign with her fingers, a gesture Marilyn had only seen in old movies about witchcraft, and hurried toward the door, nearly tripping in her haste to escape. A middle-aged man grabbed his teenage son's arm and pulled him toward the exit, muttering urgently under his breath. They all knew what they were witnessing. Marilyn's panic crystallized into pure terror. This wasn't just a dangerous man. This was something older than nations, something that existed in the spaces between human understanding and nightmare. She had attracted the attention of a creature that shouldn't exist, that couldn't exist, except here he stood, discussing security protocols in dead languages while casually rewriting her entire life. "I need to think," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need time. Time is the one thing you don't have." Valerius's pale eyes found hers, and the weight of centuries pressed down on her. "The moment I intervened, the moment I showed interest, others took notice. Running now would only make you easier prey." Marilyn's breath caught. "Prey." He'd said it so casually, so matter-of-factly, as if the natural order of the universe placed her and Vera firmly in the category of hunted things. But then she looked down at Vera, and her heart shattered all over again. Her daughter's face was lit up with something Marilyn hadn't seen in months, maybe years. Hope. Pure, uncomplicated hope. Vera was smiling, really smiling, her small hand still tingling from where the strange pale man had held it so carefully, her mind already imagining the chocolate castle cake he'd promised. Marilyn swallowed hard. She was standing at a crossroads between the horror she knew, endless cold nights, endless hunger, endless invisibility, and a horror she couldn't comprehend. She looked back at Valerius. "If you hurt her, I won't." His voice carried absolute certainty. "I couldn't if I wanted to. Not anymore." The black car arrived within minutes, sleek and expensive, the kind that didn't belong in this neighborhood. Valerius guided Marilyn and Vera outside with a hand that never quite touched them, maintaining a careful distance as if he knew how much his proximity terrified the mother even as it fascinated the child. Sarah had packed sandwiches, soup in thermal containers, pastries that were still warm. She'd handed the bags over with shaking hands and wouldn't meet Valerius's eyes. The entire bakery had watched them leave in complete silence, like witnesses to something they'd later convinced themselves they'd imagined. The winter air bit at Marilyn's exposed skin as they stepped onto the snowy sidewalk. Vera clutched her mother's hand tighter, staring at the car with wide eyes. Valerius opened the rear door, waiting. Across the street, barely visible in the shadows between streetlights, A young man stood perfectly still. Too still. No shivering despite the cold. No shifting of weight. No breath clouding in the frigid air. He watched Marilyn help Vera into the car. Watched Valerius fold himself into the seat beside them with that unnatural grace. Watched the door close, sealing them inside together. For just a moment, less than a heartbeat, his eyes flashed crimson in the darkness. Then he pulled out his phone. 300 miles away, in a mansion that looked like it had been transplanted from medieval France, Lucien Mordain reclined on a velvet chaise that had once belonged to a duchess. The room around him was all Gothic opulence, vaulted ceilings, tapestries depicting ancient hunts, candles burning despite the availability of electric light. He preferred the old ways. They reminded him of better centuries, when vampires ruled openly and mortals knew their place. His phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, then lifted it to his ear with languid grace. "Speak." The voice on the other end was young, eager. "My lord, it's the king. He's taken in strays. A homeless woman and her child. He bought them a birthday cake, offered them sanctuary." He seemed emotional. Lucien sat up slowly, his ageless face transforming. A smile spread across his features, beautiful and terrible, like watching something poison bloom into a flower. "So the king has developed a weakness for mortal strays," he murmured, his accent still carrying traces of 17th century Paris. "How very disappointing." The smile widened. "And how useful." He stood, moving to the window where he could see his own reflection in the darkened glass. Centuries of careful rivalry with Valerius had taught him patience. But this was an opportunity that might not come again. "Watch them," he ordered, switching effortlessly to French. "Learn everything. Where they sleep, what they eat, which room the child favors. Every detail, every vulnerability." He paused, savoring the words. "When the time is right, we'll remind Valerius why immortals should never care for fragile things." He ended the call and stood there for a long moment, already imagining the exquisite pain on Valerius's face when those fragile things shattered. The car's interior was warm, almost stifling after the bitter cold outside, but Marilyn couldn't stop shaking. Vera had fallen asleep against her side, exhausted from emotions she was too young to fully process, one small hand still clutching a pastry Sarah had given her. Valerius sat across from them, his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in languages that shifted and changed with each call. First Latin again, then something guttural and harsh that might have been Old Norse. Then fluid, musical syllables that could have been ancient Greek. Each conversation was brief, clipped, urgent. Double the perimeter. Yes, both wards and physical security. A pause. "I don't care if it draws attention. Do it anyway." Another call. Another language. This one sounded like it hadn't been spoken in 1,000 years. Marilyn's fear crystallized into something sharper, more focused. She waited until he ended the fourth call, then forced herself to meet those pale, inhuman eyes. "What are you?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy as a death sentence. Valerius was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. But she didn't. She held his gaze, even as every instinct screamed that she was staring down a predator that could end her life before she could blink. "I am very old," he said finally, his voice soft enough not to wake Vera. "Very dangerous. And for reasons I'm still trying to understand." He glanced down at the sleeping child, something indefinable crossing his features. "Invested in keeping you and your daughter alive." That's not an answer. It's the only answer that matters right now. His phone buzzed again. He silenced it without looking. "The specifics of what I am are less important than what I can do." And what I can do is ensure nothing touches either of you while you're under my protection." The car began to slow. Marilyn looked out the window and felt her breath catch. They were entering what looked like an upscale suburban neighborhood. Elegant townhouses lined clean streets decorated with Christmas lights. She could see families through lit windows, people cooking dinner, children playing, the picture of normal, safe domesticity. But as Valerius's car glided through the streets, she noticed something wrong. People walking their dogs crossed to the other side. A father ushering his children inside suddenly froze, then hurried them through the door without looking back. No one, not a single person, looked directly at the vehicle. They knew. Just like the customers in the bakery, just like Sarah behind the counter, everyone here knew exactly what was passing through their neighborhood. The car pulled up to a beautiful brick townhouse at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. Security lights illuminated a front garden dusted with fresh snow, a wreath on the door, everything picture perfect. Valerius opened the door, the cold air rushing in. "Welcome home," he said quietly. Marilyn held Vera tighter and wondered what kind of home required ancient wards and armed guards. Valerius carried Vera inside while she slept, cradling her with surprising gentleness for something that moved like a predator. Marilyn followed, her wet shoes leaving tracks on hardwood floors that gleamed in the soft lighting. The interior was beautiful, exposed brick, modern furniture mixed with antiques that looked genuinely ancient, a fireplace crackling with real flames. "Upstairs," Valerius said quietly, heading toward a curved staircase. "Second door on the right." The bedroom door opened to reveal something from a fairy tale. Pink and gold everywhere. A canopy bed draped with gauzy curtains that caught the light like spun sugar. Stuffed animals arranged on shelves. A unicorn, a dragon, bears in various sizes. A desk stocked with art supplies, crayons and markers, and pristine sketchbooks. String lights shaped like stars glowed softly along the ceiling. Valerius laid Vera on the bed with infinite care, removing her worn shoes before covering her with a duvet that looked impossibly soft. The child didn't wake, just curled into the pillows with a small sigh of contentment. Marilyn stood frozen in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. She couldn't speak, couldn't process the impossible kindness of this room, prepared for a child who'd been invisible hours ago. "There's a bathroom through there," Valerius said, gesturing to an adjoining door. "Clawfoot tub, everything she'll need." He moved past Marilyn into the hallway, giving her space. "The closet has clothes in her size. If anything doesn't fit, let me know." "How did you?" Marilyn's voice cracked. "How did you know her size?" "I'm very observant." He started down the stairs, expecting her to follow. "And I made calls." The kitchen was fully stocked, fresh fruit, bread, milk, things Marilyn hadn't been able to afford in months. Valerius opened the refrigerator, cataloging contents with clinical efficiency. "Everything you need is here. Utilities are handled. There's a security system. You won't need to learn it. It's more for keeping others out than keeping you in." He turned to face her, leaning against the counter with deceptive casualness. "2 blocks north, there's an academy. St. Damian's. It teaches mortal children living under supernatural protection how to survive in both worlds. Vera will start after the holiday break." Marilyn wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling the weight of everything. "We have nothing to give you," she whispered. "Nothing, being like you would want. So, what does this cost? What do you really want from us?" Before Valerius could answer, his phone vibrated. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and went completely still. Something changed in his face. Something Marilyn hadn't seen before, not when he'd confessed about his sister, not when Vera had touched his hand. Fear. Real, visceral fear. His fingers tightened around the phone until she heard the faint crack of the case fracturing. When he looked up at her, his eyes had gone cold, calculating. The warmth from earlier completely vanished. "What is it?" Marilyn asked, dread pooling in her stomach. Valerius didn't answer immediately. He was reading something, his jaw working. Then he handed her the phone. The image on screen made no sense at first. It looked like old parchment, yellowed and textured. But the writing was dark red, viscous, unmistakably organic.
Blood.
Someone had written a message in blood. "Such precious new pets you keep, old friend. Children are so breakable."
Al.
Marilyn's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the phone. "What does this mean?" Valerius took the phone back, his expression carved from ice. "It means I made a mistake." His voice was hollow, ancient. "It means someone very dangerous now knows you exist." He looked toward the stairs, toward where Vera slept peacefully in her fairy tale room, and Marilyn saw something terrible in his face. Regret. And the beginning of war. Valerius moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside with one pale hand. His eyes scanned the darkness outside, seeing things Marilyn couldn't. When he spoke, his composure was fracturing at the edges, the carefully maintained control slipping. "I have an enemy," he said quietly. "Ancient, patient, and cruel. We've circled each other for 2 centuries, testing boundaries, claiming territories, maintaining a balance of power." He turned to face her. "By bringing you here, I've painted targets on both of you. I've given him the one thing I haven't had in 300 years, a vulnerability." The words hit Marilyn like ice water. "Then we'll leave." She was already moving toward the stairs, panic overriding everything else. "We'll go back to the shelter. We'll disappear into the city. We're good at being invisible." Valerius was in front of her before she'd taken 3 steps. Not threatening, but immovable. His hand caught her arm gently, but firmly enough that she couldn't pull away. "It's too late," he said, and the regret in his voice was crushing. "Lucien knows your faces now. He has your scent, your names, everything he needs. Running will only make you easier prey." His grip tightened slightly. "At least here, you have walls."
Wards. Me.
"We didn't ask for this." "I know." His voice cracked. "I know, and I'm sorry. But we deal with what is not what should be." A timer chimed in the kitchen, shattering the tension. The cake. The bakery had delivered it while they'd been upstairs. A 3-tiered chocolate masterpiece with raspberry buttercream towers and delicate edible flowers scattered across the surface like a garden. It sat on the dining table, candles already placed, waiting to be lit. Footsteps on the stairs. Vera appeared, rubbing sleep from her eyes, drawn by the sweet scent. When she saw the cake, her entire face transformed with wonder. Is that really mine?" Marilyn wanted to scream, to grab her daughter and run despite Valerius's warnings. But looking at Vera's joy, pure, uncomplicated happiness she hadn't seen in so long, she couldn't move. Valerius struck a match, lighting the candles with steady hands that betrayed nothing of his earlier fear. "Make a wish, little one." Vera closed her eyes tight, her small face scrunched in concentration. Then she whispered, loud enough for both adults to hear, "I wish you could see your sister and niece again and tell them you're sorry and that you tried really hard." Valerius froze. The match burned down to his fingers, but he didn't seem to notice until it extinguished itself. He stared at Vera with an expression Marilyn couldn't name, something between agony and redemption. "That's a very kind wish," he managed, his voice barely audible. Vera smiled and blew out the candles. Valerius's phone rang, shattering the moment. Not a vibration, a loud, urgent ring that made them all jump. He looked at the screen, and every trace of gentleness vanished from his face. He answered, putting it on speaker. A male voice came through, young but professional, panic threading through every word. "Sire, the perimeter wards are failing. Multiple breaches, east, south, and west quadrants. We've lost 3 sentries in the last 2 minutes." A pause, punctuated by sounds of chaos in the background. Shouting. Something that might have been screaming. Lucian himself is approaching. He's not hiding anymore. He wants you to know he's coming. Valerius's hand tightened around the phone until the metal groaned. "Evacuate the outer buildings. Pull everyone to the primary residence. Full lockdown protocol. Already in progress. Sire." He brought an army. Valerius ended the call. 3 heartbeats, nobody moved. Then he turned to Marilyn, and she saw something in his eyes she hadn't expected. Not fear for himself. Fear for them. "Take Vera upstairs," he said, his voice steady despite everything. "There's a reinforced room behind the bookshelf in her bedroom. Get inside. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe." "What's happening?" Vera asked, her joy evaporating as she sensed the adult's terror. Marilyn gathered her daughter close, but kept her eyes on Valerius. "You said we'd be safe here." "I lied." He moved toward a cabinet, opening it to reveal weapons Marilyn couldn't name. Blades that gleamed with strange light. "Or I was wrong. Either way, we're out of time." Marilyn carried Vera up the stairs, the little girl clinging to her neck, finally understanding that something was terribly wrong. Valerius followed close behind, his movements now purely predatory, all pretense of humanity stripped away. In Vera's bedroom, he moved directly to the bookshelf and pressed something hidden. The entire unit swung inward with a mechanical hiss, revealing a steel-lined room barely larger than a closet. Emergency supplies lined the walls: water, food, blankets, a first aid kit that looked far too comprehensive. "Inside," Marilyn said, her voice shaking as she tried to sound calm. "It's like a game, baby. You hide here and don't come out until Mama or Mr. Valerius comes to get you." "I'm scared," Vera whispered. "I know. Me too." Marilyn kissed her forehead, breathing in the scent of her daughter's hair, memorizing it. "But you're the bravest girl I know. Can you be brave for me?" Vera nodded, tears streaming down her small face. Marilyn settled her inside with a stuffed unicorn from the shelf, then stepped back. The door began to seal, thick steel sliding into place with hydraulic precision. The moment the lock engaged, Marilyn's fear transformed. It didn't disappear. Fear never disappeared when your child was in danger. But it crystallized into something harder, sharper, deadlier. She turned to Valerius, and when she spoke, her voice was steady as iron. "What does he want?" Valerius was already moving back downstairs, and she followed. "The worst thing." He didn't slow down, didn't look at her. "Lucian plans to turn Vera into a vampire. An eternal child, frozen at 7 years old forever. He'll use her as a hostage against me, a weapon that never ages, never dies, never escapes." Marilyn's vision went white at the edges. The thought of Vera transformed into something undead, something that fed on blood, something that would watch everyone she loved die while she remained trapped in a child's body for eternity. "Over my dead body," she said, and the words came out feral. "Over everyone's dead body." Valerius stopped at the weapons cabinet, pulling out a silver blade that seemed to drink the light. Intricate runes were etched along its length, symbols that hurt to look at directly. He turned and held it out to her. "This will kill even us," he said quietly. "Aim for the heart. Don't hesitate. Vampires are fast, but we're not invulnerable. If one gets past me, you use this." Marilyn took the blade. It was heavier than she expected, perfectly balanced. Her hands had stopped shaking. Valerius studied her face, and something like respect flickered in his pale eyes. Listen to me carefully. If it comes to choosing between your survival and Vera's humanity, you choose Vera. Always. Do you understand? Yes. Not just her life.
Her humanity.
If Lucien gets to her, if he manages to turn her, you use that blade on her. You don't let her wake up as one of us. Do you understand what I'm asking you to do? Marilyn's throat closed. The thought of driving this blade into her own daughter's heart, of ending Vera's life to save her soul. Yes, she whispered. I understand. Can you do it? Marilyn met his eyes. If it's the only way to save her from that fate?
Yes.
I can do it. Valerius nodded slowly. Then you're stronger than most immortals I know. The front door exploded inward. Not opened. Not kicked in. It detonated, wood and metal shrapnel spraying into the foyer with enough force to embed in the walls. Cold wind rushed in, bringing with it the scent of old blood and older malice. Lucien Mordain stood framed in the destroyed doorway, and Marilyn understood immediately why Valerius feared him. He was beautiful the way a viper was beautiful, elegant, perfect, and utterly poisonous. Dark hair pulled back from a face that could have been carved from marble, eyes that reflected centuries of calculated cruelty. He wore a coat that belonged to another era, moving with him like living shadow. Behind him stood 6 others. Younger vampires, but no less deadly. Their eyes gleamed red in the darkness, fixed on the interior of the house with predatory focus. Lucien's gaze swept the room, dismissing the destruction. The guards already dead in the foyer, the blood splattered across expensive furniture. His attention landed on Valerius, and his smile spread slowly, full of ancient malice and triumph. Valerius, old friend. His accent was French, refined, the words wrapped in silk that concealed razor blades. I believe it's time we discuss the price of compassion. You've made such interesting choices tonight. His eyes found Marilyn, cataloging her fear, the weapon in her hand, the way she positioned herself between him and the stairs, and made such fragile investments. He took a step inside, his assassins flowing in behind him like smoke. Shall we negotiate terms? Or would you prefer I simply take what I came for? Valerius moved first. He was across the room before Marilyn's next breath, meeting Lucien's advance with centuries of controlled violence. They collided in the center of the foyer, and the sound was like thunder, inhuman strength against inhuman strength, neither willing to yield. The 6 assassins spread out, fluid and coordinated. 2 came for Marilyn immediately. She didn't think. Thinking would have paralyzed her. Instead, she moved on pure instinct, the enchanted blade singing through the air. The first vampire dodged, too fast, but the second underestimated her, saw only a frightened mortal woman, and came too close. The blade found flesh. The vampire shrieked, a sound that wasn't remotely human, and staggered back. Not destroyed, but wounded. The runes along the silver glowed brighter. Valerius was a blur of calculated fury, driving Lucien back toward the shattered doorway. But Lucien was laughing, actually laughing, as if this was entertainment rather than war. You've grown soft, old friend, Lucien taunted, spinning away from a strike that would have ended him. Soft and sentimental. It's embarrassing. The battle raged through the townhouse. Furniture shattered. Windows exploded outward. Marilyn lost track of time, focused only on survival, on keeping the vampires away from the stairs, away from Vera's room. 2 of the assassins lay motionless on the floor, permanently ended by Valerius's brutal efficiency. But there were still 4 left, plus Lucien. And Marilyn was tiring. She was mortal, human, operating on adrenaline and maternal desperation. Her arms burned. Her lungs screamed for air. A vampire caught her shoulder, claws raking through fabric and flesh, and she bit back a scream. Valerius roared, an inhuman sound of pure rage, and tore the vampire away from her with enough force to send it crashing through a wall. "Stay behind me," he commanded, his voice rough. But Lucien had been waiting for that moment of distraction. He moved with liquid grace, impossibly fast, and suddenly he was past Valerius, past the remaining guards, standing directly in front of Marilyn. Up close, he was terrifying, beautiful and ancient and completely merciless. "Such courage," he murmured, his hand shooting out to catch her throat. His grip was iron, crushing, lifting her off her feet. "I wonder if the child has the same spirit. Shall we find out?" Marilyn couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. Black spots danced across her vision. But she still had the blade in her hand. She thought of Vera hiding in that steel room. Vera smiling over her birthday cake. Vera's small hand touching Valerius's cold one with such innocent trust. Marilyn didn't freeze. She drove the enchanted blade through Lucien's heart with both hands, using every ounce of strength left in her body, screaming her daughter's name. "Vera!" Lucien's eyes went wide with shock. He staggered backward, releasing her throat, staring down at the silver buried in his chest. The runes blazed like captured sunlight, spreading through his body in burning veins of light. "Impossible," he whispered. "Immortal." Valerius was there in an instant. His hand closed around the blade's hilt, driving it deeper, twisting. "Nothing about her is ordinary," he said coldly. "You should have learned that before you threatened her child." Lucien opened his mouth, whether to curse or plead. Marilyn would never know. His body began to crumble, aging centuries in seconds. Flesh turned gray, then to ash, disintegrating from the inside out. The first rays of dawn broke through the shattered windows, catching the falling ash and making it shimmer like snow. By the time the light fully touched him, Lucien Mordain was nothing but dust on the hardwood floor. The remaining assassins fled, vanishing into the dying darkness, unwilling to face dawn or the vampire king who had just eliminated their master. Silence descended, broken only by Marilyn's ragged breathing and the crackling of flames where something had caught fire during the battle. Valerius stood motionless, staring down at the ashes of his ancient enemy. Then slowly he knelt. His hand hovered over the remains, not quite touching, and Marilyn heard him whisper words so soft they were barely audible. "I kept them safe this time. I didn't fail." His voice cracked on the last word. 3 centuries of guilt, of carrying the weight of his sister and niece's deaths, began to lift like fog burning away in sunlight. Marilyn collapsed against the wall, clutching her bleeding shoulder, and realized she was crying. Not from pain or fear, from relief, so overwhelming it felt like breaking. She had survived. Vera had survived. They had won. Years passed. Marilyn learned to fight properly, trained by Valerius and his security forces until she could hold her own against threats both mortal and supernatural. The night she killed Lucien Mordain became legend in the underground, the mortal woman who ended an ancient vampire lord with nothing but a mother's desperate love. She became Valerius's security advisor, trusted with secrets that could reshape the supernatural world. She discovered she possessed a warrior's heart beneath all those years of learned helplessness. Vera grew up safe, celebrating every birthday with increasingly elaborate cakes. She attended St. Damian's Academy, made friends with other protected children, learned to navigate a world that existed between the normal and the impossible. She never fully understood that the pale, gentle man who watched over her with such devotion was one of the world's deadliest predators. She didn't know about the centuries of guilt that drove him, or that he saw in her smile the forgiveness he'd been seeking since 1687.
She just knew he was family.
On Vera's 18th birthday, the townhouse was filled with laughter and music. Friends from the academy crowded around a 5-tier cake decorated with intricate sugar flowers. Vera stood at the center, radiant and alive, about to blow out the candles. In the shadows at the edge of the room, Valerius Titus watched with an expression of quiet peace he'd never worn in 300 years. Marilyn stood beside him, her hand finding his cold one. She squeezed gently. He squeezed back. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Words couldn't capture what they'd become to each other anyway. They were family now, bound not by blood, but by the night they chose to fight for love instead of surrendering to darkness. Vera made her wish and blew out the candles, and in that moment, watching her joy, Valerius finally understood what redemption felt like. It felt like coming home. If this story pulled you in, don't forget to like the video, drop your favorite scene in the comments, and subscribe. Tomorrow's story is already waiting in the shadows. Thanks for watching.